Do not touch their knives, 3 words that spread in whispers across American bases in Vietnam. 3 words that could save your life or destroy your career in seconds. When a U.S. Marine reached for an Australian SAS operator's blade in 1968, what followed was not just a warning, it revealed something. The Pentagon preferred to keep hidden something so ruthless, so effective, and so frightening that even Navy SEALs refused to patrol beside these men after witnessing what they did at night. This was not about courtesy or regulations. It was about survival. That knife was not merely a weapon. It was a blood-bound tool, shaped by brutal experiences in deep jungle terrain. Its owner had spent 5 straight days lying just 3 meters from enemy troops, silent and unmoving, waiting for the exact moment to act. His gear was not optional equipment. It was the thin barrier between him and death, 20 kilometers from friendly forces. Books rarely mention that Australian SAS units in Vietnam achieved kill-to-loss ratios that made many American Special Forces units look inexperienced. They conducted more than 1,200 reconnaissance patrols with casualty rates so low U.S. intelligence suspected falsified reports. The truth was simpler. They operated at a completely different level 1, where touching another man's knife could leave you injured and permanently excluded from joint missions. Americans who ignored the warning usually learned the lesson only once. U.S. commanders eventually begged these men to return after expelling them from bases. There were disturbing reasons. SAS operators often smelled like decay, which ironically made them some of the most lethal trackers in Southeast Asia. One incident involving a curious American soldier and an SAS knife became infamous for all the wrong reasons. This is not a polished television documentary. It is the raw reality of what happens when men are stripped of comfort rules and normal life and dropped into a hostile wilderness with only what they can carry. It begins with a single rule: never touch their knives. American troops who served alongside Australian SAS wondered why these operators guarded their equipment like live explosives. The explanation was deeper and darker than expected, but to understand it, you must first see how Australia was drawn into the most savage jungle conflict of the 20th century, and how the soldiers who fought there became something beyond conventional troops. Story begins not in tropical swamps, but in Australian defense offices during the early 1960s, where strategists studied maps and feared a cascade of communist expansion. The domino theory was not abstract to them. It was a nightmare scenario. Laos falls, then Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and suddenly hostile forces move south toward Australia, just as Imperial Japan had decades earlier. Memories of 1942 were still vivid when Japanese bombers devastated Darwin and submarines penetrated Sydney Harbor. Those wounds had not healed, and the fear remained real when the United States escalated involvement in South Vietnam. Australia joined quickly, believing it was safer to fight abroad than at home. Their security strategy depended on powerful allies, first Britain, then America. In 1962, 30 Australian Army advisors arrived in Vietnam to train South Vietnamese forces, but they soon found themselves fighting alongside their trainees, witnessing ambushes, casualties, and the growing strength of the insurgency. Villages friendly by day supported guerrillas at night. Supply routes turned deadly after sunset, and the jungle itself seemed to favor the enemy. By 1965, Australia decided advisors alone were insufficient. The government deployed combat troops, marking its first major independent war commitment since Korea. The 1st Battalion joined American airborne units in intense early operations. Differences in combat philosophy quickly emerged. U.S. forces favored overwhelming firepower, mobility, and decisive battles. Australians relied on patient stealth and intimate knowledge of jungle warfare developed in Malaya and Borneo. In 1966, Australia established its own independent formation, the 1st Australian Task Force. With artillery, logistics, and a dedicated operational area in Phuoc Thu Province, a region dominated by Viet Cong influence, the terrain of rice fields. Plantations and dense forest had resisted previous pacification attempts. Australian forces built a base at Nui Dat, which became the center of operations. Within this force operated a small elite unit following entirely different rules, the Special Air Service. Regiment the SAS contingent never exceeded about 90 men divided into tiny patrols of 4 or 5 soldiers. Unlike large infantry units, they carried everything themselves and operated without constant support. Their mission was not to seize ground, but to gather intelligence deep inside hostile territory. Helicopters inserted them into enemy-controlled jungle where they disappeared for days, relying only on radios and the hope of extraction. In such conditions, every piece of equipment meant survival. A misplaced knife or incorrectly loaded magazine could be fatal noise. From loose gear could reveal their presence, leaving 4 men facing overwhelming enemy numbers miles from safety. Each operator arranged equipment according to personal needs, reflexes, and experience, because there were no replacements waiting if something failed. Australian military culture emphasized that every soldier was irreplaceable. With a smaller population and force size, they could not afford heavy losses. This mindset produced warriors who treated their gear as extensions of themselves, not disposable tools. Stories spread of Americans who picked up an SAS knife out of curiosity, only to be pinned against a wall, and warned calmly never to repeat the mistake. Despite tensions, respect grew. American Special Forces who observed SAS preparations noticed meticulous checks of every item before patrols. These teams vanished into terrain, others avoided, and returned with intelligence shaping operations across entire provinces. Over 6 years, they completed nearly 1,200 patrols with astonishingly low casualties, a testament to relentless discipline. The taboo surrounding knives went beyond practicality. It related to what those blades symbolized and what they had been used for. When Australia deployed the first task force, the SIS became a precision instrument feared even by enemy commanders. Patrols consisted of only a handful of men carrying supplies for a week inside enemy territory. They moved silently through jungle, where discovery meant certain destruction. These soldiers possessed psychological endurance beyond ordinary limits, able to remain motionless for hours, communicating only through gestures, avoiding speech entirely. They ate cold rations because cooking smells traveled far. They did not smoke wash with scented soap or use deodorant, instead allowing mud, sweat, and decay to mask their scent and blend with the environment. Movement was painfully slow, sometimes only 2 kilometers per day. Each step was checked for trap spacing, prevented multiple casualties from a single burst of fire. When enemy troops approached, they froze completely, sometimes allowing opponents to pass within arm's reach without revealing themselves unless absolutely necessary. When engagement occurred, it was swift and devastating, carefully planned ambush using mines, precise gunfire, and immediate withdrawal before reinforcements arrived. The Viet Cong called them jungle phantoms because they appeared and disappeared without warning. Such operations demanded flawless equipment performance. A noisy sheath or misplaced magazine could doom the entire patrol. 4 men deep in hostile territory could not rely on quick rescue. Everything they needed had to be carried and instantly accessible. Survival depended on muscle memory functioning in darkness. Under stress, operators customized gear extensively, magazines placed in exact positions, grenades modified for safety, medical supplies arranged for access with either hand. Knives were positioned according to draw preference in fighting style. These configurations were built through life-threatening experience, making interference dangerous. Uniform appearance mattered less than effectiveness. Soldiers mixed equipment from different sources, choosing whatever worked best. Packs were selected for silence and quick-release ammunition pouches, repurposed water containers modified to eliminate noise. Weapons were tuned to prevent malfunctions or reflections. Every change represented a lesson learned. In combat, American observers sometimes mistook this individuality for lack of discipline until they saw results. It was discipline focused entirely on survival and mission success, not appearance. Touching such gear was like tampering with someone's life support system. Unlike USAF forces that emphasized body counts, Australian strategy prioritized intelligence gathering. SAS patrols often completed missions without firing a shot, mapping supply routes, identifying bases, and enabling larger operations. Later, information proved more valuable than immediate kills. Within this framework, the knife held special importance. It allowed silent neutralization when gunfire would compromise the mission. Sheaths were modified for noiseless draw handles wrapped for grip blades sharpened to extreme levels. Each operator refined his knife setup permanently based on experience. Joint bases brought Americans into contact with SAS personnel, and occasional misunderstandings occurred. Experienced troops warned newcomers not to touch Australian equipment. Stories circulated of individuals who ignored the advice and received unforgettable lessons. Security concerns also played a role. Enemy intelligence infiltration was common, and equipment layout could reveal mission intentions. Even small details, such as ration types or extra batteries, indicated patrol objectives. Maintaining strict control reduced risks. Psychological factors mattered as well. In environments where much was uncontrollable, managing personal gear provided a sense of order. Disturbing that arrangement threatened both survival and mental stability. Explaining the intense reactions, the tradition continued long after the war. Modern Australian special operations still enforce strict respect for personal equipment. Veterans decades later often react sharply if someone reaches for their gear because the lessons were learned through life and death. Experience, the warning endures across generations. Do not touch their knives, do not handle their equipment, not because of aggression, but because professionals understand that survival systems deserve absolute respect. Honor the blade, honor the blade. Operator who carries it, honor the silence he brings into places where others fear to go.